In the stillness of the southern night, the plantation sleeps beneath a veil of heat and silence. Only one light burns, a trembling candle in the mistress's hand. She stands beneath the attic door, eyes fixed on a crack of shadow above. A faint sound stirs, soft, deliberate, alive. Her pulse quickens. Dust dances in the flickering glow as the floorboards whisper secrets older than her name. She knows that noise. She's heard it before, when no one was supposed to be there. Tonight, the fear isn't a ghost, it's of something far more human. Beneath the heavy air of the deep south, the plantation stretches like a kingdom built on illusion. Vast fields of cotton shimmer under the sun, rolling endlessly toward the horizon, a sea of white masking centuries of red beneath. The mansion stands proud at its heart. White columns gleaming, windows polished to perfection, every brick whispering of wealth and power. It is a world that smells of magnolia and blood, of sugar and sweat. From afar it is beautiful, so achingly beautiful that one could almost forget what it costs to keep it so pristine. The mistress walks the veranda each morning, silk rustling softly as her eyes sweep across her domain. Her posture is perfect, her smile rehearsed. Servants bow their heads as she passes, careful not to meet her gaze for too long. To the visitors who come in their carriages, she is the embodiment of southern grace, gentle voice, kind laugh, and eyes that never betray exhaustion. But to those who live behind the house, in shacks that crumble under the weight of heat and hunger, she is another figure in the chain that binds them. Inside the mansion, the air smells of lavender and lemon oil. The floors gleam, the silver shines. Every portrait on the wall tells the story of a family that built its name on the backs of others. Men in powdered wigs, women in lace, children in ruffled collars, all immortalized as a virtue itself lived in their blood. But the portraits do not show the hands that built the house, the bodies that labored in the fields, or the quiet cries that vanish into the night. At dinner, laughter fills the grand hall. Candles flicker over porcelain plates and crystal goblets. The mistress sits at her husband's side, poised, smiling at his stories, nodding when he boasts about the profits of the season. Her heart, however, beats to a different rhythm, one that hears the faint rustle of chains carried in the servants' quiet movements. The sound of a dropped spoon sends fear through the kitchen, but none of that reaches the table. In this house, fear is tidied away, just like the dirt beneath the rugs. Outside, under the canopy of cypress trees, life breathes differently. The enslaved wake before dawn, their bodies stiff, their throats dry. The fields demand their blood and sweat, and the overseer's whip keeps time with the rhythm of the harvest. From the windows of the great house, the mistress sees only the shimmer of work done well. But sometimes when the light is just right, she notices the stoop of a back, the tremor of exhaustion, and something twists inside her, something that should not exist in a woman of her stature. Compassion is dangerous here. Sympathy, a disease. Yet she feels it growing. She watches the children playing by the quarters, their laughter swallowed by the wind. She smells the smoke from their fires at night, hears the muffled hymns that float upward when the world sleeps. The songs sound like morning disguised as prayer. Once, she asked her husband what they meant. He said, "It's nothing, just their way of making peace with what they are." But she wonders, what are they really? Beasts of burden, as he claims, or people who have learned to survive in silence. The land itself seems complicit, fertile, abundant, unwilling to judge. Beneath its beauty lies a quiet knowing, as if every blade of grass remembers the weight of the bodies that fell upon it. The river that glimmers beyond the fields carries whispers of escape, of failed attempts, of lives swallowed whole. Yet every evening the sky turns gold and the world looks perfect again. Perfection, that is her curse. To maintain the illusion, she must ignore the rot beneath. Her role is clear: to host, to smile, to keep the gears turning smoothly. The enslaved must appear content. The mansion must never show cracks. Reputation is everything, and in the South, a woman's reputation is her worth. But sometimes late at night, as the house sleeps and cicadas sing outside her window, she allows herself to breathe differently, to wonder what would happen if she stopped pretending. Still, dawn always comes. She puts on her pearls, her gloves, her smile. The world must see only the mistress, never the woman beneath. For in this place, power does not forgive softness. The beauty of her world thrives only because someone else's ugliness is kept hidden. And as the magnolia blossoms drift across the courtyard, she wonders if heaven smells like this, or if it reeks of the same sweet decay that feeds her every breath. She was born beneath the slow-turning fans of Charleston's summer, into a world where gentility was stitched into every hem of her dress and silence was considered the highest virtue of womanhood. From the moment she could walk, she was trained not to stumble, not in her step, her speech, or her emotions. Her mother taught her how to pour tea without a tremor, how to smile without showing too much truth, and how to listen while saying nothing that could unsettle a man's comfort. Obedience, she learned, was not just expected. It was beautiful. Her father, a man of wealth and reputation, believed in the sanctity of bloodlines and order. He spoke often of duty, to family, to God, to the Southern way of life. At dinner, he praised honor and tradition, never compassion. When a slave boy once tripped while serving the table, she watched her father's hand strike out, the sound echoing louder than the storm outside. Her mother did not flinch. Instead, she told her softly, a lady must never question the order of things. That night, the girl lay awake, unable to forget the look in the boy's eyes, pain mixed with something deeper, not defiance, not hatred, just a quiet knowledge that she would grow up to be like them. Her education was impeccable. French tutors, piano lessons, etiquette classes. She was molded into a creature of grace. But behind every perfect performance was a buried question. Why did kindness feel like rebellion? Why did silence sting like guilt? Still, she learned to bury her unease beneath poise. In drawing rooms and parlors, she was praised for her gentleness, her charm, her good breeding. No one noticed the sharpness of her gaze or the thoughts that flickered behind her calm expression. Marriage came early, as it often did for women of her class. Her husband, older, wealthy, and respected, offered her everything society said she should want: comfort, stability, and a place of honor at the head of his household. She accepted, not because she loved him, but because she was told that love was a childish fancy. A woman's worth lay in how well she served her husband's ambitions, not her own heart. At first, the plantation life felt like another lesson in etiquette, just grander in scale. The house was larger, the servants more numerous, the responsibilities endless. She learned the rhythm of plantation politics, the smiles that masked rivalries, the whispers traded over tea. Her husband ruled with a voice that carried across the fields, and she quickly understood that her power would never be in defiance, but in discretion. In a world where men commanded openly, women conquered quietly. And she did. She became the perfect hostess, the perfect wife. Every gesture, every glance was measured. She knew which guest to flatter, which to fear. Her intelligence became a weapon wrapped in lace. Her patience a form of control. Men underestimated her. Women envied her. But beneath the calm, something restless began to stir, a small, defiant thought that refused to die. It began with moments. The way she lingered by the window watching the workers in the field. The way her smile faltered when her husband's temper rose. She began to notice things others ignored. The bruises, the silences, the way laughter vanished when her footsteps approached. Her conscience, once quiet and obedient, began to whisper questions she could not unhear. In public, she remained flawless. In private, she became a watcher, observing, remembering, wondering if the world she had inherited was built on a lie too large to bear. She was not a heroine, not yet, but the fracture had formed between duty and doubt, between the woman she was taught to be and the woman she might become. And deep within that fracture, something dangerous began to take root. The belief that obedience was not the same as righteousness, and silence could be its own form of sin. Mornings began with the ritual of perfection. The sun rose soft and gold through plantation's tall windows, gilding the silver trays and porcelain teacups that awaited her touch. The mistress moved through her chambers like a ghost wrapped in silk, each gesture rehearsed, every smile measured. A maid laced her corset tightly, fingers trembling slightly as they worked. The mistress said nothing, though she noticed a faint bruise on the girl's wrist. She wanted to ask, but she didn't. Instead, she adjusted her pearls and straightened her posture, preparing for another day of grace performed over guilt. Her husband expected her at breakfast, not a minute late, not a word out of place. He sat at the table like a king surveying his domain, his tone clipped and commanding as he discussed accounts and labor. The slaves were lazy, the overseer too soft. When she suggested kindness, his eyes hardened. A mistress should concern herself with linens and supper, not discipline. The word stung, but she smiled as expected, buttering her toast with hands that wanted to tremble. By afternoon, she became the perfect hostess. Guests arrived in carriages that carried gossip and perfume in equal measure. She greeted them with laughter as light as lace, hiding the fatigue behind her eyes. Conversations flowed about crops, about politics, about the war that everyone whispered might come. The men debated loudly, puffing on cigars. The women fanned themselves, feigning ignorance of the cruelty that sustained their comfort. The mistress poured wine with a steady hand, though the scent of tobacco and arrogance made her stomach tighten. Outside, in the distance, came the rhythmic crack of a whip. It sliced the air like punctuation to their laughter. No one spoke of it. No one ever did. But she heard it, felt it. It hummed under her skin like a memory she couldn't wash away. She smiled wider, complimented the neighbor's new gown, and swallowed the metallic taste of silence. Evening brought elegance, candlelit dinners, polished silver, music drifting through the parlor. Yet beneath the glow, unease coiled like smoke. The enslaved moved silently between rooms, their eyes lowered, their presence invisible by design. Once, as a young boy poured wine beside her husband, his hand shook. The glass slipped, red liquid staining the white tablecloth. Her husband's voice cut through the room, cold, commanding. The boy froze, his lips trembling. The mistress reached out quickly, dabbing at the spill. "It's nothing," she said softly. "Accidents happen." But her husband's glare lingered. Later that night, when screams echoed faintly from outside, she pressed her hands over her ears until the world went still again. In her chambers, the performance ended. She removed her jewels, her corset, her smile. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, painted in privilege, hollowed by hypocrisy. Her hands, once admired for their elegance, now seemed instruments of complicity. She sat at her dressing table, tracing the candlelight's reflection across her face, wondering when the act had begun, and if it would ever end. Each day repeated itself, a symphony of manners masking misery. She learned to read her husband's moods like weather, when to speak, when to vanish. He ruled the house through fear disguised as order. His voice commanded even silence. Yet within that silence, her thoughts grew louder. She noticed things others did not. The way one servant's limp worsened, the way another's eyes held quiet defiance. Their pain had become the background music of her life, and she could no longer pretend not to hear it. At night, when the house slept, she would walk the halls barefoot, her steps soft against the creaking floorboards. The air smelled of wax and with smoke, and beneath it, something raw, human. She would pause at the attic door sometimes, not yet knowing why it drew her. The quiet up there felt different, not empty, but waiting. By daylight, she wore her grace like armor again, perfume and powder, silk and civility, all disguised as the turmoil beneath. Every compliment she gave, every polite nod, was part of a fragile performance she no longer believed in. She had mastered the art of surviving within cruelty, but each act of survival came at a cost. And as she smiled through another dinner, another sermon about obedience and order, she finally understood the truth that had been building like thunder behind her ribs. That silence was not protection. It was surrender. And one day, she would break. It began with a sound, soft, fragile, almost human. The mistress had climbed to the attic to escape the noise of the evening below, the laughter of her husband's guests, the endless talk of crops and cotton. She sought silence, solitude, and perhaps a breath of air not tainted by hypocrisy. The candle in her hand flickered against the wooden beams as she opened the attic door. The hinges groaned, releasing a draft of cold, stale air. Dust swirled in the thin light, like ghosts rising from the floorboards. She stepped inside. The attic was where memories went to die. Trunks of old gowns, portraits of long-dead ancestors, furniture too worn for display. Yet tonight it felt different. The air carried a strange warmth, the faint scent of sweat and something metallic. Blood, maybe. Her heart began to beat faster. She raised her candle higher, its trembling flame casting crooked shadows across the rafters. For a moment, everything was still. Then a faint exhale, not hers. She froze. The sound came again, soft, labored, from behind an old cedar chest. She moved closer, her slippers barely whispering on the floor. Her mind raced. An animal? A thief? A ghost? When she reached the chest, she set down the candle and lifted the lid. It was empty, but behind it, in the narrow space between the wall and the trunk, something shifted. "Please," a voice rasped. She gasped, nearly dropping the candle. The flame wavered dangerously before she steadied it. There, crouched in the shadow, was a man, his clothes torn, his skin covered in welts and dirt. His eyes, though sunken and fevered, met hers with desperate clarity. An escaped slave. For a long moment neither moved. The silence between them was deafening. She could hear only her pulse and his shallow breaths. Every instinct screamed for her to call for help, to run. But another voice, deeper, quieter, urged her to stay. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. He didn't answer, only stared, fear and defiance mixing in his gaze. She saw his wrists, raw from rope burns, his chest rising in pain. He was dying, or close to it, and in that fragile body was a truth her world had built itself on denying: humanity. She turned toward the attic door, the candle trembling again. If her husband found him, the man would be dragged out, tortured, made an example of, and she would be blamed for harboring him, or worse, complicit in his punishment. Yet something in her shifted. She thought of the night she had heard the whip crack, of the screams she had tried to forget. They came back now, echoing through the wooden beams. Slowly, she knelt. "Don't move," she whispered. She pulled an old quilt from a trunk and laid it over him. His breathing steadied slightly. She looked toward the window. The plantation yard below was still alive with lanterns and laughter. No one could know. Her hands shook as she doused a candle. In darkness, she listened. The man's breathing, her heartbeat, the creak of the floor as she turned to leave. Her secret was now alive, hiding above the world she once ruled so confidently. That night, she barely slept. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Yet beneath the fear, a strange calm took root. The calm of someone who has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The attic was no longer just a space of storage. It had become a living confession. By morning, she looked different in the mirror, not because of what others could see, but because of what she could no longer hide from herself. Her life was divided now. The woman of grace and the woman of guilt, the mistress of the house and the keeper of the attic secret. Downstairs, her husband called for her, his voice sharp with command. She took a slow breath, smoothed her dress, and smiled before descending the stairs, every step echoing the knowledge that her sanctuary above had become both her salvation and her doom. The days after her discovery moved like a fever dream, each hour heavy with the weight of what she now carried. The attic, once a forgotten space above her head, had become both her confessional and her prison. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her slippers sounded like thunder in her ears. Every servant's glance felt like accusation. By daylight, she remained a perfect image of Southern grace. She hosted afternoon teas on the veranda, her parasol angled just right against the harsh sun. Guests gossiped, laughed, and praised her charm, never suspecting that the woman who poured their tea had spent the previous night kneeling beside a trembling secret in the shadows of her own house. But beneath the smooth surface, she was unraveling, quietly, deliberately. The dance of deception she learned to live in fragments. A smile here, a lie there, each piece stitched together with care. Her hands, once used to arrange flowers and fold linen, now smuggled food, candles, and bandages beneath layers of lace. The attic became a world unto itself. The air thick with dust and fear, the beams echoing with whispers she could never speak aloud. Each night, she climbed those stairs with her heart pounding like a drum. The flicker of her lantern painted trembling shadows on the walls, as though the house itself disapproved. She would pause midway, listening for footsteps, her husband's boots, the servant's soft tread. Nothing, only the hush of the sleeping plantation. Inside the attic, her secret waited, sometimes in silence, sometimes breathing shallowly, sometimes whispering questions she couldn't answer. The first nights were the hardest. She didn't sleep. She rehearsed excuses for every possible discovery. If caught, she would claim she was overseeing storage. If questioned about the missing food, she would accuse the kitchen hands. But deep inside, she knew none of it would save her. If the truth emerged, it would burn her and everything she knew to ash. Eyes everywhere the mansion's walls seemed to grow eyes. The servants watched her more closely now, their expressions unreadable. Some may have known something, or guessed. The enslaved quarters were a network of whispers, and secrets traveled faster than carriages. She sensed that they saw her slipping away at night, her lantern dimmed to a ghost glow. Her husband, too, began to notice changes. His sharp blue eyes followed her movements, his tone colder, clipped. He asked where she'd been walking, why the pantry seemed emptier. His suspicion was a knife pressed to her throat. One evening, during supper, he spoke of loyalty, not as virtue, but as a weapon. He reminded her that betrayal, in any form, was punished. The way his gaze lingered told her that he was no longer talking about servants. He was talking about her. The war within fear became her constant companion, but so did resolve. Every lie she told was a small act of rebellion, every secret errand, an assertion of her will. For the first time, she felt powerful, not because of wealth or title, but because she controlled something her husband could not. Yet the cost was immense. Her nerves frayed. Her reflection grew pale and haunted. When she looked into the mirror, she saw not a mistress, but a fugitive in silk. The house had turned into a stage where every smile was a mask and every conversation a test. There were moments when she almost confessed, when the strain of deception weighed too heavily, when her trembling hands nearly reached for honesty. But then she would remember the attic, the secret that depended on her silence, and she would force herself back into composure. The sound from above one night, as she sat embroidering in the parlor, a faint noise broke through the quiet, a muffled thump from the attic. Her heart froze. The guests at the table didn't notice. Her husband did. He tilted his head, listening, his brow tightening. "What was that?" he asked. "Probably a raccoon," she replied smoothly, smiling, her needle never missing a stitch. Her pulse raced, but her voice was steady, the voice of a woman who had learned to lie beautifully. That night, after the house had gone still, she crept up to the attic once more. Her secret looked at her with terrified eyes, understanding the danger had grown. She didn't speak. She only placed a trembling hand over their mouth and whispered, "We must be quieter." They are listening. In that dim, dusty space, surrounded by shadows and silence, the mistress realized there was no turning back. The web she had woven now held her captive, delicate, intricate, and deadly. Every breath, every whisper, every heartbeat tied her closer to the secret she swore to protect, even if it destroyed her. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it brought no peace. Only feverish dreams of rattling chains, muffled cries, and pale hands reaching through the floorboards. The mistress would wake before dawn, heart pounding, the taste of guilt sharp in her throat. In the quiet hours before the house stirred, she would sit by her vanity, staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was composed, elegant, untouched by scandal. Yet in her eyes lingered something fractured, a tremor of doubt, of horror, of knowing too much. The silk gown, the jewels, the perfume, all had become disguises masking decay. Each morning, she painted her face with calmness, pinned her hair perfectly, and descended the grand staircase as though she were not hiding a secret in the rafters above. The guests who greeted her with polite admiration saw a woman of grace. None could hear the silent scream that echoed behind her smile. The battle within her conscience had turned into a restless ghost, haunting every moment of stillness. While pouring tea, she would see blood instead of sugar, chains instead of spoons. The laughter of guests grated against her nerves. She wanted to shout, to tell them what she had seen, what she had done, but fear strangled the words before they reached her lips. By day, she played her role flawlessly. By night, she returned to the attic with trembling hands. The secret, fragile, human, alive, depended on her silence. And yet, with every passing hour, that silence grew heavier, crushing her from within. Sometimes, she tried to justify her actions. She told herself she was doing what was right. That compassion was worth the risk. Other times, doubt poisoned her thoughts. What if she was wrong? What if mercy in this cruel world was only another form of betrayal? She began to see herself in fragments: the dutiful wife, the secret protector, the silent accomplice. None of these versions fell whole. Guilt as companion at dinner. Her husband spoke proudly of the plantation's order and discipline. Each word tightened the noose around her conscience. She smiled when expected, nodded on cue, but her mind drifted to the attic, to the quiet breathing that depended on her defiance. Her heart twisted between two cages, the one society had built for her and the one she had built for herself. She was no longer certain which was worse. The enslaved women in the kitchen watched her differently now. Their eyes held questions they dared not ask. Sometimes she wondered if they knew. Perhaps they saw the fatigue in her face, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. She sensed both pity and distrust, emotions that mirrored her own self-loathing. The edge of madness one evening, after another sleepless night, she walked alone through the garden. The magnolia trees glowed faintly in the moonlight, their beauty almost cruel in its indifference. She thought of escape, of leaving everything behind. But where could she go? A woman without her husband's name was no one. The sound of laughter from the house behind her sliced through the night. It was a reminder. Her world would continue spinning, beautiful and brutal, even as she fell apart. When she returned inside, her husband was waiting. His gaze lingered too long, his voice too soft. "You've been distant," he said. "Are you keeping something for me?" Her pulse quickened, but her expression did not falter. "Only my head aches," she lied, her tone smooth as glass. He studied her for a moment, then smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, as she ascended the stairs once more, her body trembled with exhaustion. The air felt heavier now, as though the house itself had learned her secret and was waiting to devour her. Inside the attic, she sat in silence for a long time. The secret she had protected for weeks now stared back at her, frightened, fragile, and human. And for the first time, she wondered if she had saved them or condemned them both. Her conscience had become her captor, and the walls of the mansion, once her kingdom, had become her cage. The first close call came on a rain-soaked evening, when thunder rolled to the countryside like distant cannon fire. The mistress sat in the drawing room with her embroidery untouched, her thoughts climbing toward the attic as if drawn by invisible threads. Above her head, the secret stirred, a faint creak of movement, and her heart nearly stopped. Then came the sound that froze her blood, her husband's boots on the stairs. He rarely went up there. The attic was a forgotten realm, thick with dust and discarded relics. Yet tonight, he had decided to fetch an old chest of linens for their guests. Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed. Without thought, she rose, smoothing her dress to hide the tremor in her hands. "Let me fetch it," she said quickly, her voice too light, too eager. He paused mid-step, studying her face. "You? Since when does my wife do servant's work?" The moment stretched. The candlelight trembled between them. She forced a laugh, practiced, hollow. "Since I can't bear you sneezing through supper, dear. You know the dust up there." A beat of silence. Then, with a dismissive wave, he turned away. "Very well, but don't be long." Only when his footsteps faded did she allow herself to breathe again. The house tightened its grip in the days that followed. The walls seemed to close in. Guests arrived unannounced, relatives, friends, strangers, flooding the plantation with voices and curiosity. Servants moved through the halls with gossip on their tongues. Every footstep above the second floor made her spine stiffen. The attic, once her secret refuge, now felt perilously close to exposure. A servant named Clara, too curious for her own good, had begun cleaning in areas long ignored. One afternoon, the mistress caught her dusting near the attic stairs. "Leave it," she said sharply. Clara froze. "Ma'am, you thought wrong." The mistress interrupted, her tone sharper than intended. The girl lowered her gaze and fled. For hours afterward, guilt gnawed at her, but fear outweighed remorse. One wrong glance, one misplaced question, and everything would collapse. The dance of deception at night. Her husband's questions became more pointed. "You've been restless," he remarked one evening. "Do you wander the halls after midnight?" "Only when the heat keeps me awake," she replied, careful not to blink too fast. He leaned closer. "And the servants? Have they been bothering you?" "No," she whispered. "No one bothers me." He studied her as though peeling away her layers of calm. Then, suddenly, he smiled. "Good. I wouldn't want anyone to disturb you." The way he said it, soft, almost tender, made her blood run cold. That night, she sat awake in the dark, clutching the bedpost, listening to every sound. The cicadas outside screamed. The mansion groaned with its ancient bones. She imagined footsteps on the stairs, the attic door creaking open, the faint, desperate breath of the one she hid. Her body ached from stillness, her mind from terror. The almost discovery one afternoon, while hosting tea for the ladies of the parish, she heard a sound so faint it might have been imagined. The soft scrape of wood from above. Her cup nearly slipped. Laughter filled the room, covering the noise, but her ears rang. She excused herself with a polite smile, ascending the stairs under pretense of fetching a shawl. Halfway up, she found a young servant boy standing near the attic door, holding a broom. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Just sweeping, ma'am," he said, startled. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This hallway doesn't need sweeping. Leave now." He nodded quickly and ran. She waited until his footsteps vanished before unlocking the attic door. Inside, her secret sat in the corner, trembling, eyes wide with fear. "It's all right," she whispered, though her own hands shook. "You mustn't move when anyone's here. Promise me." A nod. Silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. Fractured composure by the time she returned to her guests. Her face was serene again, the very image of composure. She poured tea, smiled at the chatter, nodded at gossip. But inside, she felt hollowed out, a vessel carrying terror. Every escape came at a cost. The mask grew heavier. Her mind throbbed with exhaustion. The edges of her sanity frayed with each close call. One evening, as she brushed her hair before bed, she caught her reflection trembling. Her hand, her lip, the faint flutter beneath her eye. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. A thought slithered through her mind, cold and cruel. Perhaps I'm becoming what I fear most. For all her intelligence, her careful lies, her perfect grace, she was now a prisoner of her own secret. And somewhere above her in the darkness of the attic, the secret waited, listening, knowing that one mistake would destroy them both. In the quiet corners of the plantation, eyes began to notice what words dared not name. The enslaved people who moved like shadows to the mansion saw everything. The mistress's sleepless eyes, her late-night wanderings, the faint flicker of candlelight from the attic when all others slept. They said nothing. Silence, after all, was the only language that kept them alive. Among them was Ruth, the housemaid who'd served the mistress since her wedding day. She knew her patterns, when she prayed, when she cried, when her mask of calm slipped for the briefest moment. Lately, that mask had cracked more often. The mistress's hands trembled as she poured her morning tea. Her gaze lingered too long on the staircase leading upward. Ruth noticed these things, as women often do. Not through suspicion, but through intuition born of survival. One evening, as the mistress passed Ruth in the hallway, their eyes met. Something unspoken flickered between them. Fear, maybe, or trust. Then the moment was gone, buried beneath the heavy rituals of obedience. The rumors in the quarters and the cabins behind the cotton fields. Whispers began to circulate. Someone had heard footsteps in the attic when the master was away. Someone else swore they'd seen the mistress carrying a basket of food after midnight. The talk was hushed, nervous, wrapped in superstition. The attic, they said, was haunted not by ghosts but by guilt. Old Samuel, the butler who had served 2 generations of masters, warned the others to keep their voices low. "Don't you bring no trouble where already lives," he muttered. "That woman's playing with fire, and fire don't care who it burns." Still, even Samuel's eyes softened when the mistress passed by. He'd seen her pause before scolding a servant. He'd seen the way she winced when her husband struck a man for dropping a glass. Something inside her had changed. Whether that change was mercy or madness, no one could tell. The loyal one's Clara, the young maid scolded weeks earlier near the attic stairs, carried her guilt like a stone in her chest. She hadn't meant to pry. She'd only wanted to please. But now, she understood the tension in the air. The mistress avoided her eyes, yet Clara felt an invisible thread tying them together. One night, as she passed through the hallway, she heard a sound from above, a cough, faint but human. She froze. Every instinct told her to run, to forget. But curiosity, or perhaps compassion, rooted her to the floor. Moments later, the mistress appeared, pale and breathless. "Clara," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here." Clara looked up, lips trembling. "I won't say nothing, ma'am." Their eyes locked. In that fragile silence, 2 women from opposite worlds understood each other perfectly. Both prisoners, both afraid. A house of shared secrets from that night on. Clara moved differently. She lingered near the stairs during storms, pretending to polish the rail. Ruth covered for her when questions arose. Old Samuel, though he said little, began to close the parlor doors a bit earlier each night, giving the mistress privacy she didn't request but desperately needed. No one spoke of it openly, yet the house itself seemed to hum with the shared weight of a secret. Servants glanced at one another with wary eyes. Even the enslaved who worked the fields sensed a change. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. They all understood one truth. The mistress was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had the power to destroy them all. The price of their silence was not loyalty nor rebellion. It was survival. To speak was death. To remain quiet was to gamble with fate. They had learned to live between those thin lines of morality, where the right choice often looked like cowardice. And yet, as days passed, a strange sort of unity grew among them. They protected her secret not because she was their mistress, but because some part of them hoped her secret was an act of goodness, something small and human in a world built on cruelty. They didn't know what hid above the ceiling beams, or why her eyes brimmed with quiet terror. But they knew this, whatever she guarded, it was worth the risk to protect. And so, the house stood still in its own conspiracy of silence, a place where fear, compassion, and defiance lived side by side, breathing beneath the same roof. The first sign of danger came not from within the house, but from the dusty road beyond the magnolia trees. Riders began to appear more often. County patrols scanning for runaways, neighbors stopping by under the guise of friendly visits. Their smiles were sharp, their eyes sharper. Rumors, it seemed, had found their way past the iron gates. Something was amiss at the Whitfield plantation, they said. Something the mistress was hiding. At first, the whispers were faint, a murmur at Sunday gatherings, a half-joking comment at the dinner table. But soon they grew teeth. "Strange lights in the attic," someone remarked. "She's gone pale, you notice? Hardly speaks these days." Even the church ladies, once her allies, began exchanging knowing glances when she entered. The mistress felt their judgment like thorns beneath her skin. The county stir in the patrols grew more aggressive that summer. They scoured every nearby property, searching for evidence of harboring fugitives. One evening, as the mistress sat reading by lamplight, a knock thundered to the front doors. Her husband answered, his voice booming through the foyer. "Routine check," one of the patrolmen announced. "Some say a runaway is hiding in this region." Her heart nearly stopped. She stayed seated, feigning calm, the book trembling in her lap. When the boots echoed through the halls, closer, heavier, she wanted to scream. But she smiled instead. She had learned long ago that silence was a woman's best disguise. The men left without climbing the attic stairs, but the mistress didn't sleep that night. Above her, she heard the faintest creak of a floorboard. It wasn't just her secret anymore. It was a ticking clock counting down toward ruin. The husband's suspicion her husband had noticed too. The sharpness in his eyes betrayed what his lips refused to say. He began asking questions at odd hours. About household accounts, about supplies missing from the pantry, about why she'd taken to walking alone after dark. "Have you been keeping something from me, Margaret?" he asked one evening, his tone deceptively gentle. She smiled, her composure flawless. "Only the usual, dear, your temper, your reputation, and your supper." His hand twitched as though tempted to strike her, but he didn't. He simply stared, the silence between them stretching like wire drawn too tight. In that moment, she realized he didn't need proof. He only needed suspicion. And suspicion in this world was as deadly as truth. The neighbor's curiosity, her friend and neighbor, Mrs. Fontaine, arrived the next afternoon under the pretext of bringing preserves. "You've been scarce at our luncheons," she said sweetly, her eyes drifting toward the staircase. "Everything all right here, dear?" The mistress nodded, her fingers gripping her teacup so tightly that porcelain cracked beneath the pressure. "Just feeling unwell," she replied. Mrs. Fontaine smiled politely, but there was calculation behind her charm. She lingered too long, her gaze sweeping across the ceiling. The mistress could almost feel her listening for footsteps above. When the door finally closed behind her guest, the mistress pressed her palms to her face. The world that once bowed to her grace now watched her like a hawk. The prison of appearances of Plantation, once her kingdom, had turned into a cage. Every path she took, every conversation she endured, felt like walking along the edge of a blade. Even the servants' eyes seemed to follow her, not with malice, but with shared fear. The air was thick with unspoken understanding. The mistress was cornered, and if she fell, she would drag them all down with her. Her days became mechanical performances, dinners, prayers, afternoon walks. But beneath the ritual, her mind spun ceaselessly. Who had spoken? What had they seen? How long before the attic silence betrayed her? A desperate measure that night, she crept upstairs with trembling hands and whispered to the attic door, "You mustn't move. Not a sound. They're coming more often now." A faint voice replied, barely audible, "You can't hide this forever." Tears stung her eyes. "Then I'll die trying." Below her feet, the mansion groaned as if in agreement, the weight of her deception pressing into every beam and nail. She had built her life on appearances, and now that same facade threatened to crush her. The closing walls each dawn felt like a narrowing corridor. The sun that once gilded the veranda now mocked her with its brightness. Her husband's temper boiled more frequently. Her servants flinched at his voice. And through it all, the attic waited, silent, breathing, alive. The mistress had once ruled her world through charm and composure. Now she ruled through fear, not of others, but of herself. For every lie she spoke to protect her secret, another part of her soul withered. She was no longer the lady of the house. She was its prisoner. And beyond the gates, the world was closing in. The air and the manner changed. It wasn't just heavy. It was charged like the moment before lightning strikes. The mistress felt it in her bones, in every whisper that seemed to follow her down the corridor. For weeks, she had managed to keep her secret buried beneath a web of lies and polished smiles. But now, something was shifting. The walls that had kept her secret safe were starting to crack. It began with a small thing, as these things always do. A child's toy, misplaced and found where it shouldn't be. A ribbon left too close to the attic door. Her husband, already suspicious, noticed the small inconsistency she had tried to smooth over. His voice, once affectionate, now carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "Why do you flinch every time someone mentions the attic?" he asked one night. His eyes narrowed in the candlelight. "What is it you keep hidden up there?" She smiled through the fear. Her hands trembled only slightly as she reached for her wineglass. "Old memories," she lied softly. "Some doors are better left closed." But the lie hung in the air like smoke, visible, choking. That same night, a servant, young, quiet, observant, paused at the bottom of the stairs. He had heard something, a muffled sob, the creak of a floorboard. He looked toward the attic, then down at his hands. He knew better than to speak, But silence was becoming harder to keep. By dawn, the house was alive with unease. Rumors had begun to ripple beyond its walls. A neighbor had seen lights flickering in the attic at odd hours. Another claimed they heard a cry carried by the wind. The mistress's carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. Then came the twist. That morning, she found the key, the only key to the attic, missing. She froze, panic clawing at her throat. The key wasn't just metal. It was control. Without it, her secret was vulnerable to discovery. She stormed through the house, searching quietly, desperately, trying to keep her fear from showing. But every step she took seemed to echo louder. Every glance from a servant felt sharper, knowing. And then fate twisted. The quiet servant, the one who had heard the noise, appeared before her. He held the key in his open palm. "I found this," he said softly. His eyes did not meet hers. Her breath caught. "Where?" she asked, the word barely a whisper. "Outside the door." He didn't accuse her. He didn't ask. He simply placed the key on the table between them, a silent act of both defiance and mercy. For a moment, their eyes met. In that glance, everything was understood. He knew. She knew he knew. And still, he protected her. It was an act of impossible bravery, or perhaps impossible fear. Because in this house, knowledge was dangerous. Silence was survival. That night, she wept for the first time in months. Not for guilt, not for fear of exposure, but for the unbearable weight of being saved by someone she was supposed to own. But fate wasn't finished. Her husband returned earlier than expected, his boots echoing in the hallway. He had been drinking. The smell of tobacco and suspicion clung to him. "I had a talk with Samuel," he said darkly. "He says you've been different, nervous." Her blood turned to ice. The name struck like a curse. Samuel, her most loyal servant, her quiet protector, had spoken? Or had the husband twisted his silence into accusation? She forced a laugh. "You're letting your imagination get the best of you." But he was already walking toward the stairs. "The attic," he said. "I'll see for myself." Panic surged through her. For a split second, she considered everything. Confession, violence, escape. Then, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "Don't." But the candlelight was already moving up the staircase, his shadow stretching long and thin. Down below, Samuel stood in the dark, eyes wide, breath shallow. He could hear everything. The creak of the steps, the rustle of her dress as she followed, the sharp gasp when the door began to open, and then silence. Long, terrible silence. When the mistress finally descended, her face was pale, her hands stained with something darker than fear. The secret, once hidden, had taken its own form and demanded its price. For the first time, Samuel looked away. He understood now. Every secret, every kindness, every betrayal, they were all bound by the same fate. No one in that house would ever sleep peacefully again. It began with thunder. At first, distant, a low murmur on the horizon, but soon it grew, rolling through the valley like the growl of something ancient and hungry. The storm had been building all day, pressing against the plantation walls, the air thick with the scent of rain and secrets. Inside, the mistress stood before the attic door. Her candle flickered in the wind, seeping through the cracks. Behind that door, everything she had fought to protect or to hide waited in suffocating silence. Her dress was torn, her hands still shaking from what had happened hours earlier. The house, once full of quiet order, was now a stage of chaos. Servants whispered in corners. Her husband had not been seen since the confrontation. The key, that cursed little object, sat on the table beside her, glinting in the dim light like an accusation. Lightning split the sky, flooding the room in white for a heartbeat. In that flash, she saw herself in the window's reflection, pale, hollow, and unrecognizable. She whispered to no one, "I was trying to save us," but even she didn't believe it anymore. The wind slammed against the shutters, rattling them like a warning. The storm outside was no longer distant. It was here, pounding on the walls, clawing to get in. She descended the staircase slowly, each step echoing louder than thunder. In the grand hall below, water dripped from the ceiling. The portraits of her ancestors hung askew, their painted eyes watching her with judgment carved into oil and canvas. Samuel appeared from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "the river's rising. We should move the horses." His calm voice cut through her hysteria like a blade through silk. She looked at him, seeing for the first time the quiet strength in his eyes, the kind that endured pain far deeper than her fear could imagine. She almost said, "Thank you." Almost. But the words caught in her throat as another sound, a crash, heavy and final, echoed from upstairs. Her eyes widened. "The attic," she breathed. The storm howled louder. Rain lashed the windows like claws. She ran back up the stairs, her candle extinguished by the wind halfway up. Darkness swallowed her, broken only by the violent flashes of lightning through the glass. At the attic door, she froze. The lock was broken. The door swung open on its own, creaking like something alive. Inside, the room was in disarray. The blankets overturned, the chest open, and near the far wall, a figure, not standing. Still, for a moment, the storm seemed to stop. Time held its breath. She knelt beside the motionless form, hands trembling. Her voice was a whisper of madness. "I didn't mean for this. I didn't mean..." The candlelight returned just long enough to reveal her tears and the truth of what she had done. The thunder came again, louder this time, shaking the walls. The roof groaned under the weight of the rain. She clutched the body to her chest, rocking, murmuring prayers she no longer remembered how to finish. Downstairs, Samuel stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring upward. He knew he should leave. The storm was rising, the river flooding. The whole world seemed to be cleansing itself in rage. But something held him there, rooted to the spot, because he knew that what was happening upstairs was not just madness. It was consequence. When she finally emerged, the dawn was gray and heavy with mist. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Her dress was soaked, her face streaked with tears and soot. She looked toward the horizon, toward the broken fences and waterlogged fields. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's done," she said. "It's all done." Samuel didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. The silence between them said it all. The secret was no longer hers to keep. It had consumed everything. Behind her, the manor loomed like a wounded animal. Windows shattered, roof torn open, its insides exposed to cleansing rain. She took one last look at the house that had been her cage, her kingdom, her grave. Then she turned and walked into the storm. The thunder rumbled once more, softer now, as if the heavens themselves were exhaling. The mistress had made her final choice, to free the secret, to face her own ruin. And as the storm faded, so too did her name, her voice, her story, swallowed by the rain, buried in the soil that had seen too much. Only the witnesses remained, silent, unspoken, and forever changed. The house was silent after the storm, unnaturally silent. Rain still clung to the windows, dripping in thin trails down the glass, but the thunder was gone. The air hung heavy, like the pause between a heartbeat and its echo. Somewhere deep inside the plantation's ribs, a floorboard creaked, slow, deliberate, almost human. The mistress stood at the foot of the attic stairs once more. Her dress was torn, her hands stained with something darker than mud. The key that had once bound the attic shut was gone. The door that had guarded her secret, now stood ajar. A whisper of wind brushed past her face, carrying the scent of decay and dust. It was open, finally open. Her candle wavered as she climbed. Step by careful step, her breath shallow and uneven. Each creak of the wood beneath her feet sounded like confession, one she had spent her life avoiding. Behind her, faint voices stirred, servants murmuring below, her husband calling her name, a hound barking restlessly outside. The world was waking, and with it, her lies. When she reached the attic, dawn light slipped through the cracks in the roof, cutting through the gloom like divine judgment. Everything she'd hidden was now visible. Nothing left to shadow, nothing left to deny. She stood there for a long moment, staring into the wreckage, The storm had torn through the room as though nature itself had demanded to know her secret. The coverings were gone, the chest overturned, and the truth, raw, undeniable, lay bare for anyone to see. Then she heard it, footsteps behind her. Her husband's voice, sharp and thundered with disbelief. "What have you done?" She didn't turn. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The words she had rehearsed for weeks dissolved into the still air. What could she say? That she had done what he never dared to feel, to protect, to choose something right in a world that celebrated wrong? Her silence enraged him. He stormed forward, eyes blazing, jaw trembling with fury and fear. But then he saw. His expression changed, the rage melting into something hollow. For the first time, he looked small, powerless. The empire of lies he had built, upheld, and ruled, now undone by the truth, sitting quietly in the dust before him. He staggered back a step. The mistress watched him, her eyes calm now, not proud, not broken, simply awake. Outside, the sun began to rise, its light spilling through the attic window. She stepped closer to it, the golden glow falling across her face. "Do you see now?" she whispered. Her voice was steady, the voice of a woman who had nothing left to hide. He said nothing. The silence between them was vast, centuries of cruelty and denial packed into a single breath. From below, voices grew louder. Someone had fetched the sheriff. Horses approached through the wet soil. The plantation, her prison, was about to become her courtroom. She turned once more to the attic, her eyes tracing every inch of it. The walls, the stains, the memory of what had lived here. And then, for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't joy. It was release. "Let them come," she said softly. "Let them see." Her husband tried to grab her arm, but she pulled free, gracefully, as if she were stepping out of a dance rather than into ruin. She descended the stairs slowly, her posture regal, her eyes distant. Below, the servants had gathered. Some stared in confusion, some in quiet understanding. Samuel stood at the base of the stairs. His gaze met hers for an instant, and that was enough. He knew. He had always known. Outside, the world was changing. The plantation no longer glowed with its usual grandeur. It looked hollow now, stripped of illusion. The mistress stepped out onto the porch as the rain ceased, the final drops glinting like tears in the rising light. The men on horseback waited. The sheriff's voice broke the still air. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we'll need to ask you a few questions." She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She just looked past them, toward the horizon, toward freedom, toward judgment, because this was her reckoning. And whether the world saw her as savior, sinner, or something between no longer mattered. The truth, the very thing she had buried, feared, protected, was finally free. And in that freedom, so was she. The camera would linger here, on her calm, unreadable face as the screen fades to gray. The wind rises one last time, carrying the echo of her voice. In a world built on lies, truth is the only sin worth dying for. The days after the attic door opened pass in a strange hush, a silence too heavy to be peace. The plantation, once alive with the rhythm of command and obedience, now breathed like a wounded animal. Its grand column stood the same. Its magnolia trees still bloomed, but something unseen had changed. The air felt watchful, the soil unsettled, as though the land itself had witnessed the truth and refused to forget. The mistress's name was spoken only in whispers. Some said she had gone mad, others that she fled into the woods under the cover of night. A few claimed she'd been taken by the sheriff to face justice, though no one ever saw a trial. The official records would later reduce her to a single line: disgraced lady, presumed deceased. But the servants, the enslaved, the quiet observers of her performance, they remembered differently. Samuel, the man whose life had intersected with hers in that hidden space above, walked the grounds in silence. When asked about her, he would only say, "She saw what others wouldn't." His tone carried no hatred, no forgiveness, just understanding. Her husband didn't speak for weeks. He boarded the attic, ordered the furniture burned, and locked himself in his study. At night, guests said they heard him pacing. muttering to himself, calling her name as though she still roamed the halls. By the next season, he sold the estate and moved north, a hollow man haunted by the ghost of a woman who had dared to act against him. But the house did not forget her. Visitors claimed that, on quiet nights, candlelight flickered behind the attic window, though no one ever lived there again. The maid said the air upstairs smelled faintly of roses, her perfume lingering as if she still walked among the dust. Others swore they heard soft footsteps above when the wind blew through the magnolias. And then there were the letters. Years later, a box was found sealed inside a wall of the drawing room. Letters written in her elegant hand, though never sent. They were addressed to no one, or perhaps to everyone. In them, she spoke of guilt, compassion, and rebellion, of what it meant to live in a world where goodness was a secret crime. "I was born into silence," one letter read, "and I shall leave it only by speaking what others will not hear." Her words became a quiet legend. Among the enslaved, her story turned into a whisper of hope, proof that conscience could bloom even in the heart of cruelty. Among the white families of the county, she became a cautionary tale, a woman undone by unnatural sympathies. History tried to erase her, but rumor kept her alive. Decades later, long after the war that would tear the South apart, the plantation lay in ruins. Weeds claimed the garden she once walked, and the house sagged beneath the weight of time. A historian touring the remnants noted something strange. The attic, though covered in dust and decay, still felt different, almost sanctified. In his notes he wrote, "It is as though someone once made a stand here, small but not forgotten." And perhaps that was her victory. Not the kind carved in marble or written in law, but the kind that lingers, quiet, inconvenient, and immortal. Her defiance had not changed the world overnight, but it cracked its foundation. The act of mercy she hid had sown a seed of rebellion, not against her husband or her class, but against the life she was born into. Now, whenever the wind rustles through the magnolia trees, it carries a faint echo, the sound of a woman's voice, soft but unyielding, a voice that reminds anyone who dares to listen that justice often begins not with thunder, but with a whisper in the dark. And somewhere in that whisper, her name still lives. The mistress who had a deadly secret in her attic did not vanish. She became the story itself, a ghost of conscience haunting the history that tried to bury her. The house still stands, weathered and silent, its white columns streaked with moss, its shutters sagging like tired eyelids. The magnolias have overgrown, their roots curling through cracked stone, reclaiming what once belonged to the earth. Birds nest in the attic now, that same attic where, decades ago, a secret dared to breathe. The locals don't come near after dusk. They say the house remembers. On certain nights, a single candle burns faintly behind the upper window, though no one has lived there for years. Children whisper that the lady of the house still wanders inside, guarding the secret she once protected with her life. Some call her a ghost. Others call her a saint. But time, ever merciless, reshapes truth. Her name has faded from the records, her grave lost to weeds. Yet her story survived, not in books or sermons, but in murmurs passed from one generation to the next. A servant's grandchild once told it to a traveling preacher. A field hand carried it into freedom after the war. Each retelling changed the details, but not the essence. A woman, trapped by privilege, dared to act against it. To some, she was a traitor to her class. To others, she was proof that conscience could flicker even in the darkest hearts of power. The attic became a symbol of guilt, defiance, and the unquiet soul of the South. For years, strangers visited the ruin hoping to find traces of what she hid. Some believed it was a person, a runaway who survived because of her courage. Others claimed it was a box of letters exposing her husband's cruelty. But the truth, whatever it was, had already outlived evidence. What remained was a feeling that somewhere in those shadow beams, humanity had taken a stand. In the centuries that followed, the plantation was renamed, then abandoned. Developers came and went, but none stayed long. Machinery broke inexplicably. Foundations cracked overnight. One worker swore he heard a woman humming from the attic when the air was still. Soft, he said, like she was rocking a child. Historians later debated her existence. Some called her myth, A convenient ghost created to soften the ugliness of the past. Others found fragments, a letter, a ledger, a rumor in a local diary, enough to suggest she was real. Yet the ambiguity only strengthened her legend, because legends are born not from certainty, but from what the heart needs to believe. And so, the mistress who hid her secret in the attic became something larger than her time. She became the whisper of conscience that survives every empire built on silence. Her story reminds us that rebellion does not always roar. Sometimes it hides in quiet corners, in trembling hands, in candlelight behind locked doors. The old house may fall one day, swallowed by vines and rain, its walls finally giving way to time. But when it does, the wind will carry something from its ruins, the echo of her defiance, the breath of a woman who once chose mercy over obedience. In that echo lives her legacy, not a monument, not a name etched in stone, but a lesson that even in the darkest attic, where dust covers truth and fear locks the door, courage can still find a place to breathe. And as the screen fades to black, one final image lingers, the attic window glowing faintly against the night. Not a haunting, but a remembrance. The world forgot her name, but the attic never did.